Officer Nora Evans could feel her heart thud in her chest as she steered the patrol car toward the Blackridge City Museum. The dispatcher's voice had crackled through the radio moments ago, reporting a break-in at the museum's antiquities wing, a place lauded for its rare historical treasures and strict security systems. In the passenger seat beside her sat Hunter, the department's star K-9 officer, a German shepherd with a sleek coat and keen eyes. Despite the chaotic downpour and the swirling sirens, the dog remained alert, yet calm, ears perked, nose pressed near the window as though already catching the scent of something amiss. Nora made a sharp turn, the police vehicle's headlights raking across the museum's imposing facade. She remembered the building well. It was constructed out of gray stone, complete with intricate columns that gave it a neoclassical flair. Tonight, though, the usual grandeur felt ominous under the storm's fury. The glass doors at the museum entrance, normally locked tight at this hour, were slightly ajar. Alarm lights pulsed a steady red, bathing the marble entryway in a ghostly glow. Nora threw the car into park and hopped out, mud and water splashing around her boots. Hunter leapt gracefully to the ground at her side. Together they hurried to the entrance, guns drawn, or in Hunter's case, teeth at the ready. Yet as they breached the threshold, the scene that greeted them didn't quite match the typical chaos of a break-in. Yes, the Aztec artifacts display case was shattered, bits of glass littering the polished floor. But the masked figure they spotted creeping around the corner did not look like a simple vandal, or even a methodical cat burglar. Something about him, his posture, his hesitance, felt different. Nora gestured for Hunter to follow. The dog lowered himself, ready to pounce on command. Over the echo of thunder and rain, Nora heard faint, hurried footsteps. She and Hunter rounded the corner, and there stood a man clad in black, face partially covered by a simple cloth mask, clutching an ornate object close to his chest. "Freeze!" Nora yelled. Hunter bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his throat. But what happened next stunned Nora in a way she never thought possible. The masked suspect raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture of surrender or plea. His other hand, still holding the artifact, trembled slightly. There was a raw urgency in his eyes, as if he was scared. Normally, the moment Nora commanded Hunter to act, the dog would lunge and subdue the suspect in seconds. Tonight, though, was different. When Nora barked the command, "Hunter, get him!" the German shepherd sprang forward, but halted inches from the suspect. In the gloom of the shattered display room, Nora watched, stunned, as Hunter's growl dissolved into an inquisitive sniff. And then, incredibly, his tail began to wag. "Hunter, no!" she repeated, confusion spiking her voice. Hunter looked back at her once, then turned to the suspect again. Instead of obeying his trained directive, the dog moved closer and made a small whine, his posture neither aggressive nor fearful. The suspect, taking advantage of the moment, gently placed the artifact on the floor. Nora leveled her gun, caution pounding in her veins. Even with Hunter hesitating, she remained in control. "Don't move!" The man lifted both hands in the universal sign of surrender. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," he insisted, voice muffled by the mask. "I only wanted—" Lightning flashed outside, casting harsh shadows across the exhibit halls. Hunter, nose quivering, kept his muzzle just inches from the suspect's pant leg. Then the dog wagged his tail even more strongly, as if greeting an old friend. Nora's mind churned with questions. In all her time working with Hunter, she had never seen him behave this way toward a suspect. Support team arrived shortly after. 2 more officers secured the museum perimeter, while Nora forcibly guided the suspect, now handcuffed, to the police cruiser. He offered no resistance. Once in the station's holding area, the man finally revealed his face and identity. Daniel Reyes, mid-20s, dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. He had an air of earnestness about him, despite his predicament. As Reyes waited for processing, Hunter and Nora stood nearby. She was still grappling with Hunter's unusual reaction. This was a K-9 that had subdued violent offenders and cornered armed criminals. Why had he suddenly refused to act? Without warning, Reyes spoke up. "Bolt. His name is Bolt." Nora frowned. "What?" Reyes nodded at Hunter. "He used to be called Bolt, until he was taken away 2 years ago. I never forgot him." Bolt, a strange spark lit in the dog's eyes as soon as Reyes said the word. Hunter's ears perked. He turned his head toward Reyes as though listening intently. Nora's stomach lurched in surprise. That was no coincidence. Hunter had recognized the name. "This is Hunter," she corrected. "He's a police K-9, definitely not a stolen dog." Reyes shook his head. "Number not stolen from you, maybe, but from me, and I can prove it." Nora felt a tension coiling in her chest. She had no idea how to react to these claims yet. All she knew was that the dog she trusted with her life had shown an inexplicable bond with a man accused of breaking into the city museum. The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived at the police station, Ms. Clarice Matthews. She was a short, silver-haired woman with keen, bright eyes and an unshakable presence. Despite her age, she navigated the station's corridors with brisk determination. "I was at the museum last night," she announced to the officer at the front desk. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge of the break-in investigation." Soon enough, Ms. Matthews sat across from Nora in a small interview room. The woman wasted no time. That young man, Daniel Reyes, did not break in to steal. He only wanted to retrieve an heirloom. Nora raised an eyebrow. He was caught in a restricted section, holding an Aztec artifact. Ms. Matthews leaned in. "I'm telling you, Officer Evans, that artifact was his to begin with, or at least it belonged to his family. He said it was a missing bracelet from his great-grandfather's time. The museum purchased it under suspicious circumstances at an auction. I've attended enough events at the museum to know they're not always transparent about acquisitions." Nora felt an uneasy stirring. Everything about last night's events had been odd, from the suspiciously missing alarm data to the bizarre emotional tension around Reyes and Hunter. Ms. Matthews' statement added yet another layer. Before Nora could ask more questions, the door opened and in stepped Officer Marcus Hall, her superior. Hall was in his early 40s, tall, with sharp features, and a reputation for being uncompromising. "Ms. Matthews," he greeted curtly, "I appreciate your concern, but we're handling the matter. Mr. Reyes is under arrest for trespassing." Ms. Matthews stood, her lips pursed in disapproval. "You need to be careful, Officer Hall. The museum has some skeletons in its closet." She directed a pointed look at Nora. "I hope you'll keep an open mind." With that, she departed, leaving Nora with more questions than answers. Hall wasted no time asserting his authority. "We're charging Reyes with trespassing at minimum," he told Nora, crossing his arms. "The museum's board is up in arms about the break-in. They want a swift resolution." Nora looked at her partner, Hunter, who sat at her feet. The dog's posture remained uneasy. She recalled how Hunter had whined when Reyes was handcuffed, almost as though he recognized him. "Sir," Nora began carefully, "there's something about Reyes that doesn't add up to a simple burglary. He says he was retrieving a family heirloom, and—" Hall raised a dismissive hand. "I'm aware of his claims, but we have to do our job by the book. The museum's property was nearly stolen. We can't let him walk just because he has a sob story." "Yes, sir," Nora replied, though unease knotted in her stomach. Her eyes flicked to Hunter again, and a question churned in her mind. If Reyes was there for a reason, why had Hunter reacted like he was greeting a friend? Later that evening, Nora obtained a copy of the museum's security system logs, or rather, what remained of them. According to the museum's security officer, all footage from the moment Reyes appeared had inexplicably vanished from the server. The break-in alarms trigger, the suspect's approach. Everything was gone. This is unusual, the security officer admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Our system automatically backs up all footage to 2 separate drives. Both were wiped? Nora pressed, flipping through the incomplete file directory. He nodded. Yes, and not even wiped clean, deleted in such a way that there's no simple trace left. This takes serious know-how. Nora's mind raced. Who would go through that kind of trouble to destroy the footage? If Daniel Reyes truly was a naive suspect, he wouldn't likely possess that level of technical skill, nor the resources to manipulate a high-end security system. Additionally, the museum's advanced protocols made accidental deletion nearly impossible. She left with a swirl of questions intensifying in her head. There's something unusual about the whole case. Back at the station, Nora decided to talk more with Reyes while he waited for formal charges. She found him sitting alone in a small interrogation room, staring at the table. His clothes were still damp from the previous night, and dark circles ringed his eyes. When she entered, Hunter trotted behind her. Immediately, the dog's posture changed. He whined softly, tail wagging. It was the same reaction as before, and it baffled Nora anew. "I'm not making this up," Reyes said before Nora could even speak. "I recognized him the second he didn't attack. That's Bolt, my dog." He swallowed, voice shaking slightly. "He was taken away during a citywide roundup of stray dogs a couple of years ago." Nora frowned. "Were you keeping a dog without registration?" "No, I had him legally, but my landlord sold the building, and the new owners claimed Bolt was a stray to get around the pet restrictions. Next thing I knew, he was gone. I went to the pound, the police. Nobody would tell me anything." She hesitated. "That's a very serious claim. Bolt is Hunter. He's been an official K9 for almost 2 years now." Reyes nodded, eyes teary. "Check behind his ear. There's a small spot shaped like a half moon. I'd recognize it anywhere. I remember when he was a puppy. That marking was so unique. It's him." Nora's heart hammered in her chest. She had seen a weird shape behind Hunter's left ear. For a moment, she couldn't quite meet Reyes's gaze. "Let's say, hypothetically, you're right. Why did you break into the museum in the middle of the night?" "I learned that the museum illegally purchased my great-grandfather's Aztec bracelet. My family tried to get it back through legal channels, but someone stopped us. I decided to go get it myself." Nora stepped back from the table, her mind churning. Reyes's story about the missing dog and the heirloom sounded plausible, but it lacked proof. Still, she couldn't ignore the swirling doubts that multiplied every time she watched Hunter's reaction. Determined to dig deeper, Nora accessed Hunter's official files. She keyed in her credentials on the station's computer system, navigating to the K9 adoption and training logs. At first glance, everything looked standard. Vaccination documents, registration forms, an initial health certificate, but then she noticed small inconsistencies. The adoption date was typed, scribbled out, then typed again with a new date. Several vaccination records were missing signatures or had them in the wrong places. And the veterinarian listed was someone she had never heard of, even though she prided herself on knowing most of the local vets. Her stomach tightened when she opened a scanned document bearing Officer Marcus Hall's signature. He had apparently overseen Hunter's integration into the K9 program. On top of that, records referencing the dog's origin and breed classification appeared to have been tampered with. She took the printed pages to the station's supervisor of K9 operations, an older officer named Cruz. He frowned the moment Nora laid them out. "This doesn't look right. Normally, there's a full background check. We'd have to confirm the dog's health and temperament, but these forms are incomplete. And if Hall personally expedited them, that's irregular. Nora left the office with her heart pounding. Hall was known for being demanding, but not necessarily unethical. Yet the deeper she looked, the more tangled the situation became. Later that same afternoon, Ms. Matthews returned to the station, brandishing an old digital camera in one hand. She insisted on seeing Nora directly. Once in the privacy of the small interrogation room, she handed Nora the camera. "I took these photographs right before the alarm went off," she said, flipping through the images. One shot showed a tall figure, face turned away from the camera, carrying a wooden crate with distinctive museum markings. It was time-stamped well before the museum called the police. "That's not Daniel Reyes," Ms. Matthews pointed out, and Nora agreed. The man in the photo was considerably taller and broader. Then Nora's gaze shifted to the background. Parked near a side entrance was a car. The resolution wasn't perfect, but she could just make out part of the license plate, and it looked suspiciously like Officer Hall's personal vehicle. Nora felt a chill run through her. If Hall had been at the museum before the official call, what was he doing there, and why hadn't he mentioned it? With the photograph in hand, Nora confronted Hall the next morning. He was in his office, stacks of folders littering his desk. She placed the printed photo in front of him, her voice steady. "Sir, can you explain this?" Hall's eyes flicked over the image, betraying only the slightest reaction before he smoothed his expression. "I sometimes volunteer at the museum," he said blandly. "That night, I stopped by for personal business. Is that a crime?" "You were there before the break-in, carrying what looks like a wooden crate." Hall shrugged. "The museum regularly ships exhibits in or out. I was helping them move a piece. I didn't want to mention it because I'm not supposed to handle tasks like that while off duty. Didn't want to complicate the investigation." The excuse sounded too casual. Nora clenched her jaw. "And what about the museum's Aztec artifacts? The missing bracelet? Reyes's claim he was framed?" Hall's eyes narrowed. "Reyes broke into that museum, and you have enough to charge him. Don't let some old lady's photos and a suspect's sob story cloud your judgment." But the more Hall insisted on Reyes's guilt, the more suspicious Nora became. She had seen enough as a police officer to recognize that something was wrong, insisting a case was open and shut when it was anything but. Ms. Matthews was not one to be deterred. Later that day, she and Nora visited the museum archives to see if they could dig deeper. The curator, who had been at the museum for decades, had recently passed away, but Ms. Matthews knew where he used to keep personal notes and diaries in a back storage room filled with dusty cabinets. They found an old leather-bound notebook dating back years. Inside were scribbled entries detailing the museum's expansions, artifact purchases, and internal politics. One passage caught Nora's eye. Another night, Officer Hall insisted on storing a few extra artifacts temporarily in the private wing. Claimed it was for the museum's security, but I remain unconvinced. Next to that diary entry was a taped black and white photograph. It depicted a storage area with crates labeled Private Collection. And there, in the corner of the photo, stood a dog that looked remarkably like Hunter, down to the shape of his ears and the slope of his back. Nora's blood ran cold. If that was Hunter, or Bolt, as a younger dog, it meant he'd been around the museum and Officer Hall well before the official K9 record stated. She snapped photos with her phone, ensuring she had her own digital copies in case anything mysteriously disappeared. Nora's mind raced as she pieced together the puzzle. If Hall had been involved in an illicit dog trade, perhaps rounding up or acquiring animals for private security contracts, it would explain the incomplete adoption records and the fact that Hunter had turned up out of nowhere. She found a quiet room to call Reyes. Normally, contacting a detained suspect directly was unorthodox, but Hall's looming presence in the station made her certain the official channels would be compromised. She told Reyes about the photograph of the younger dog that looked like Hunter and asked for any more details he could provide about how Bolt might have been taken. Reyes sighed over the phone, voice trembling. They told me the dog was being put down with a batch of strays that month, like the city was clearing the shelters. But I never believed that. Bolt was too healthy, too well trained. I always suspected someone wanted him for a reason. It all fit too well, yet it was horrifying to consider. Her partner, the dog she'd trusted with her life, might have been a stolen pet forced into a second identity to cover up a deeper scandal. In a stroke of luck, the police department's IT specialist managed to salvage fragments of the museum's deleted footage. Late one evening, he called Nora to his desk, beckoning her to watch the screen. The recovered clips were low resolution and choppy, but still intelligible. Footage from a side hallway showed a figure wearing plain clothes and carrying a wooden crate. Despite the grain, the faint reflection on the glass display case revealed enough of the man's face to identify him. Officer Marcus Hall. The timestamp put him at the museum a good 15 minutes before the break-in alarm. Another clip displayed Reyes slipping in through a service entrance, heading directly toward an alcove where the Aztec exhibits were displayed. He seemed more anxious than secretive, his movements lacking the stealth typical of a burglar. He checked a particular glass case, likely looking for the bracelet. No attempt to open other cases or any sign of rummaging. Nora's gut twisted. If Reyes were after a widespread loot, he would have targeted high-value artifacts all over the exhibit, but the footage showed him going straight for one item. Coupled with the diary and Ms. Matthews' notes, it looked more and more like Reyes was telling the truth, and Hall was orchestrating something else entirely. The next day, Nora made the risky decision to confront Hall with the newly uncovered footage. She found him in his office, scowling at a pile of paperwork. She shut the door behind her, heart pounding. "What is it now, Evans?" he asked, annoyance plain in his tone. "I have footage placing you in the museum before the alarm," Nora said evenly, brandishing a USB drive. "Explain that." Hall's face tightened. "Is this about that old crate again? I told you, I volunteer there." Nora spoke over him, uncharacteristically bold. "We have partial footage proving you left the antiquities storage room carrying a box. Reyes's image also shows him well away from that room at the time. All you've done is push to charge him and hide your own involvement." Hall stood abruptly, his chair screeching on the floor. "Watch yourself, Officer Evans." Outside the office, Ms. Matthews happened to be passing by with some newly printed evidence. She overheard raised voices and hurried to Nora's desk, where she'd left a set of documents. Before she could pick them up, Hall stormed out, eyes blazing. He saw Ms. Matthews, saw the documents in her hands, and advanced with a furious scowl. "Those belong to the department," he snapped, snatching at the papers. Ms. Matthews gasped. Nora rushed forward, but Hall already had some of the files. He ripped them up in a frantic attempt to destroy them. Nora managed to grab his arm. "What the hell are you doing?" she hissed, shock and anger twisting her stomach. But inside, Hall's eyes was a glimmer of desperation, like a cornered animal ready to fight for its life. The confrontation spilled into the hallway. A few officers peeked around corners, uncertain whether to intervene. Miss Matthews clutched the pieces of paper she picked up from the ground, while Nora wrestled the rest from Hall's hands. Hunter, a constant shadow at Nora's side, let out a low growl, baring his teeth at Hall. Hall's composure finally cracked. "I'm not letting some worthless thief and a naive junior officer ruin everything," he barked, chest heaving. "Yes, I staged it. I framed Reyes. I needed a scapegoat for the missing artifacts. The Aztec bracelet was supposed to move on the black market next week, and the museum wouldn't even notice it was gone, except for that fool Reyes who got in the way. The admission hung in the air, shock freezing everyone who heard it. And the dog, Nora asked quietly. What about Hunter? Or Bolt? Hall's lips curled into a contemptuous sneer. He was an investment. Private security companies pay top dollar for well-trained dogs. That mutt wouldn't break under their methods, so I needed a way to keep him from going to waste. The K9 unit was perfect. No one ever questions where a good police dog comes from. A wave of disgust surged through Nora. She could hardly believe the depth of Hall's scheming. He had been willing to sell artifacts, mislead the museum, possibly end Reyes's life with a hefty prison sentence, all for personal profit. Fury vibrated in her chest as she realized just how thoroughly he had manipulated the system. Sensing the tension, Hunter stepped forward, body taut, hackles raised. When Hall tried to shove past them toward the documents, the German Shepherd stood in his path, letting out a fierce bark. The dog was no longer confused. He seemed to understand exactly who Hall was and what he had done. In the distance, officers hurried forward, drawn by the commotion. Hall lunged for Ms. Matthews again, intending to grab any remaining evidence. But in a flash, Hunter clamped his jaws around the sleeve of Hall's jacket, firm enough to restrain, but not to seriously injure. Hall jerked backward, cursing, but the dog held fast. "Stand down," came a commanding voice from the captain, who had arrived on the scene. Hall tried to break free, but Nora and two other officers tackled him to the ground, handcuffing him on the spot. The corridor buzzed with shock and adrenaline as Hall's facade of authority lay shattered in a matter of moments. In the wake of Hall's arrest, the police department scrambled to make sense of his treachery. Investigations revealed that the Aztec bracelet had not been the only artifact Hall tried to funnel through the black market. Ledger entries from the museum, cross-referenced with private transactions in Hall's bank account, showed a disturbing pattern of smaller items lost over the years. Meanwhile, documents in Hall's home and storage locker exposed another grim side to his operations. He had ties to a shadowy broker, specializing in guard dogs for private security. In a separate file, authorities uncovered references to the liquidation that Reyes mentioned, the systematic rounding up of dogs in certain neighborhoods, some euthanized, others trafficked. After an internal review, the charge of trespassing against Daniel Reyes was dropped. In fact, the police department, under the direction of the newly assertive Captain Foster, issued a public apology to Reyes for wrongful arrest and the mishandling of his case. Throughout the entire process, Hunter, or Bolt, stayed close to Nora, but each time Reyes appeared, the dog's excitement and familiarity shone like a beacon. The truth was undeniable. This was indeed the same dog Reyes had lost 2 years prior. Hall's downfall triggered a sweeping reform within the Blackridge Police Department. The captain ordered a complete overhaul of K9 adoption procedures. Effective immediately, every new dog would have to undergo an extensive background check, verified by independent veterinarians and at least 2 different supervisory officers. The old system that allowed Hall to slip Hunter through the cracks was dismantled. Likewise, the department instituted stricter rules on how evidence was handled and recorded. No more single points of failure that could lead to accidental deletions. They upgraded the entire security system, introducing multi-server backups and routine audits. Ms. Clarice Matthews, buoyed by her role in unmasking Hall's schemes, led a grassroots effort for civilian oversight. She partnered with local community leaders to form a watchdog group, ensuring that if any officer tried to replicate Hall's unscrupulous activities, they'd face immediate public scrutiny. Nora attended the group's inaugural meeting. It was humbling, yet heartening to see how the community rallied together, determined not to let corruption slip through unnoticed again. In a small ceremony in front of the station, Reyes accepted the department's apology, flanked by Nora and Captain Foster. Though the apology couldn't undo the emotional turmoil he had endured or the time he'd been detained unjustly, it was a step toward mending the rift between him and the authorities. When all was said and done, the final question remained: What would happen to Hunter, Bolt, now that the truth about his past had come to light? He had served the department bravely, saving countless lives, yet he also belonged to Daniel Reyes by right. The newly minted departmental policies offered a solution, a special custody agreement that allowed the dog to remain part of the K9 unit while also having time at Reyes's home. In essence, Bolt's training and experience wouldn't be discarded, but he could reclaim his old bond with the man who once raised him. Nora agreed wholeheartedly. She had come to love Hunter as a partner, but she respected the unbreakable link the dog shared with Reyes. On the day the arrangement was finalized, the three of them met in a small park near the station. It was a crisp afternoon, the stormy weather having given way to bright sunshine. "I can't tell you how grateful I am," Reyes said quietly, scratching behind Bolt's ear. The German shepherd wagged his tail in contentment, pressing into Reyes's side. "I never thought I'd see him again." Nora smiled, kneeling down to pat the dog's head. "He's something special, that's for sure. And I'm sorry for everything you went through." Reyes nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for believing me." For Nora, the entire ordeal served as a powerful lesson. Sometimes the biggest threats come not from obvious criminals, but from those within the system who abuse their power. She had glimpsed how easily lies could flourish when shielded by rank and reputation. Yet she also saw how a small group of determined individuals, herself, Ms. Matthews, Reyes, and even a dog who remembered his real name, could unravel even the most tightly woven deceptions. As for Bolt, life took on a beautiful duality. On duty, he was the same sharp-witted K9, responding to commands with unwavering focus, protecting officers and citizens alike. Off duty, he curled up at Reyes's feet, enjoying the warmth of a home he once thought lost forever. The dog transitioned seamlessly, as though he had finally found completeness in bridging both worlds. One evening, Nora visited Reyes's small apartment for dinner. Bolt greeted her at the door, tail wagging, but quickly padded back to Reyes, bringing a chew toy in his mouth. A memory from the past, perhaps. Bolt's old routine. The sight made Nora's eyes sting with bittersweet emotion. Reyes chuckled. "He always did that when I came home from work. It's like he's telling me everything is okay." Nora took a seat in the living room, looking around at the modest space. The walls were adorned with photos of Reyes's family, including a sepia-toned portrait of his great-grandfather. Next to it, carefully placed in a display case, was the reclaimed Aztec bracelet. It was an elegant piece, centuries old, shining with the same quiet dignity that Reyes himself exuded. Beneath the glowing lights, Nora watched Reyes kneel down to pat Bolt's head. The dog licked his hand, tail wagging, a picture of contentment. A stolen heirloom returned, a stolen dog found, and a city awakened to the importance of vigilance. No matter how dark the night had been, the morning was bright with new beginnings. If the story touched your heart, please share your feelings in the comments section and give us a like. Thanks for watching.